This is the Philanthropy Show, connecting and inspiring philanthropy.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Show. I'm your host, Luann Saraga-Walters. We're talking today about something that's essential to the development of all nonprofit staff, and that is how to build your staff, how to build the character leadership roles, how to build your board leadership roles. And joining me to help with that is Lisa Huetteman. She's a consultant with the Nonprofit Leadership Center. She's an author in her own right with the book, The Value of Core Values, 5 Keys to Success Through Values-Centered Leadership. And through her business, she's had 30 years experience now working with small businesses and nonprofits on leadership development and how to do that. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
This is a fabulous topic because it's one that, we were talking about before the show. Nonprofits don't have as much of an opportunity as corporations do in that essential management, middle management, and even general employee training for leadership. So first, I want to go back to the beginning and tell me about you, how you became involved with the core values of leadership and why it's an essential part of your consulting.
Okay. Well, my background, I spent 23 or so years in corporate America. I left 12 years ago because I guess my values were not in alignment with what I was doing. I was working, traveling, had a lot of overseas travel to some really great places, but I had young children at home. And I realized that I had to get some things in alignment, and that was I needed to put my family before my work. So I left my corporate job and co-founded Black Diamond Associates, and we essentially did what we were doing in our corporate world, which is helping develop our teams, helping our companies develop business plans and business strategies, and doing this as a consultant and a business coach with small businesses. Our target market was anybody we could drive to and be home for dinner.
Awesome. Well, that's a value in itself.
It is, exactly. So the book came from what I call a divine inspiration. I had a thought that was so crystal clear it was audible that said, you're going to write a book about companies that are successful because they live their core values. You're going to use case studies to write this book. And I was instantly filled with this passion to write it. I knew that it was going to be a reality. Cool. Now, it didn't happen like that. It took me about 3.5 years to actually do the interviews. I interviewed a couple of dozen companies, and then writing their stories, and trying to distill what was common amongst those companies. And that's where I came up with the 5 keys that are essential for companies whose cultures lead to their success.
I'm sure you're familiar with books like Good to Great and others that may be, well, now there's Good to Great in the nonprofit sector as well, because initially when I worked for T-Mobile, we read that as an example of how do you develop your mid-level managers and teaching them those processes. Yes. I want to go into the nonprofit realm and take a look at how can you apply it. Can you, or are there things that you have to kind of shift a little bit? Can you apply the same policies that we have with developing those skills or learning from those skills, leadership skills in the corporate world to the nonprofit world? Or are there adjustments that have to be made because of the differences between them?
Well, I think essentially, probably about 80% of it is exactly the same. First of all, when we have nonprofits, like for-profits, are organizations, which is a group of people who get together for a purpose. The main difference with nonprofits is that you have kind of a two views of who you're serving. On the one hand, you're serving the philanthropic needs of your donors. On the other hand, you're serving the whatever needs of your clients, whether it be the homeless, whatever it is. So in a for-profit business, you truly are serving the needs of your customers. Now, when it comes to core values, the way that they are developed typically in a for-profit, you do strategic planning, and the leadership team of the organization is involved with that. What I've found in some nonprofits that I've worked with, not all, but some, what happens is the strategic planning happens at the board level, and they really focus on the vision and the mission and the goals. But they may or may not define core values. Core values then are an operational thing that need to be lived within the organization.
Yeah, yes.
So sometimes they are or aren't developed with the people in the organization that need to live them
Do you know,
out.
it's funny that you say that, because as soon as you said that differentiation, it brought me right back to T-Mobile, where I was working as a major account manager. And at the time, we were undergoing a shift because we had gone from VoiceStream to T-Mobile. That's back in the day. I mean, we're talking early on,
And
right?
my corporate was involved in the mobile telecommunications industry, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's that. So the core values that they wrote out, I'm going to give you an example of one that still resonates with me because it rang so true. I still remember it. Trust in the positive intentions of others. That was a core value that T-Mobile rolled down, and that meant that we would not assume that somebody on our team messed up on purpose, or that somebody made the wrong decision, or that somebody was having a bad day so they were intentionally being spiteful, or that customer service was not being helpful because they're customer service and they're horrible,
Yes.
or that a customer, an outside customer, somebody buying the product, was just trying to prove that we knew. I mean, it was to trust in the positive intentions. People are truly wanting information, or they're responding in a certain way. That core value, which is interesting because it's from a company standpoint, is something that I can apply across the board in my personal relationships. So when you're talking about core values for a corporation or a nonprofit or whenever, you're talking about core values of people relating to each other.
Yes.
I love that.
Well, it is. And one of the first keys, because my book identifies 5, the first key is that you have to own your own values. You have to know what those things are. So when you say, it comes into your personal life, well, they should, because you personally must find that these are values that you accept and you own.
Mm-hmm.
You may have personal values that are not at a corporate or organizational level, but they must be in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
So an example, and they might be both. An example are character values, honesty and integrity.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not a person who is honest and values honesty, if you do not have integrity, in other walking the talk and living according to moral principles, you will not ever do that in a corporate environment.
Mm-hmm.
Corporations or businesses, organizations may or may not identify those specifically as their organizational values, or they might. Something like teamwork could be an organizational value, but it may not be a personal value. Mm-hmm. Because there's nothing, as an individual, there's no need for teamwork. Mm-hmm. But when I get into an organization, it is something that I choose to value.
Or as a member of a family unit.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Exactly.
Then that's your team. Like
Exactly.
we're Team Saraga Walters, and
Yeah.
so we know that our actions affect each other and
Yes.
how we go. Talking about having that board level conversation about strategy, and then developing the core values so that the staff members of the nonprofits can also relate to it. It seems like sometimes we separate those two, that here's the board and here's the staff, and there's the C-level, the CEO, the COO, the CFO, whomever the senior executives may be, who are trying to do that balancing act, but it doesn't get pushed down.
Right.
How can that get pushed down in through the nonprofit world? What do we need to do?
Well, it happens a couple of different ways. So for the nonprofits where the board, through their strategic planning process, does identify these core values, one of the things that's really essential is that the board needs to personally say, well, how do those core values play out for us as a member of this board?
Mm.
How do I honor those values as a board member?
Wow.
How is it going to guide our decision making as board members?
As a member of this board.
As a member of
because
this
a lot of
board.
our board members are board members of other boards, as
Sure.
well as full-time employees and whatever their corporate life is.
Right.
So you're saying take it and look at it from this
Right.
one organization's particular viewpoint.
And one of the organizations I do highlight in the book is a nonprofit, and part of their recruitment, their board recruitment, involves screening against these core values that are central to who and what this organization is.
Really?
Yes.
That's fantastic.
And that's how it
That's a
should be.
best practice.
That is a best practice.
That is awesome, because by doing that, a lot of times it's, we need an accountant, so we just go find an accountant.
Yeah.
We need a something, so we go find a something. But in addition to what it is that they do in those networking areas that are very vital to a nonprofit's health, it's do they meet our core value? Do they exhibit this? Well, how would you do that? You sit down and have a conversation with that potential board member?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. I am working, I've worked in a lot of different ways. One organization that I worked with, they were very dysfunctional. It was a nonprofit. And there was a lot of infighting going on and things that happen whenever you get people together, you know, they don't necessarily get along that well. And an issue with nonprofits is a lot of times that people join those organizations because they're very passionate about the cause. And so
Sure, that's the unifying force.
Unifying force. But without the core values that says, this is how I'm going to treat the other people here. As you mentioned, you know, that I'm going to assume the positive intentions of those people. Well, if you don't clarify that, then bad behavior can happen. Same thing in a for-profit world. If you don't clarify what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior, bad behavior can happen. So in this particular organization, as we were working to develop the teamwork within the organization, they didn't have core values. So we allowed the members of the team to define them. What did they feel were essential? And then we took them up to the board. And we asked the board, what does this mean for you? Do you ratify these in essence? And how does it play out for you as a board member? And some of the examples are, well, I probably need to show up to board meetings, or, you know, those are the behaviors that reflect the values within that board.
You know, you just made me think of something which we're going to launch into in the second segment, but by asking them how are these values reflected, it also made me think about how are these values reflected in the stories that we want to share about who we are with the community or with our donors. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to take a short break and come right back with the Philanthropy Show.
This show sponsored in part by
My Paper Pusher. Consider it done.
Follow the Philanthropy Show on Facebook for behind-the-scenes action, polls, and commentary.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show. We're talking with Lisa Huetteman, who is the author of the book, The Value of Core Values, and looking at how these core values are intrinsic within a company, a nonprofit, which of course is what this show is about, and helping you, I just had an aha moment as we were in the break, in helping you become more productive. Because when your team is on the same page with the values that you're, in how you relate, in your actions, you're less concerned about all the noise that can surround the nonprofit staff in doing what they need to do.
Right.
And we want to go, I want to dive into that because I wish we'd been recording in the break because we had such a great conversation around this. But
well,
yes.
one of the things that we were talking about is that most organizations measure people based on their productivity goals. How much money did you raise? You know, what was your impact in the community? Whatever those metrics are. When you really are a values-centered organization, in addition to those, because they are important, you really are looking at how well an individual is honoring the core values of the organization. And so part of your performance planning says, what does it look like for me in my role? If I'm a fundraiser, what does it look like for me in my role to be honoring our core values? What would I do and what would I not do? What are the behaviors that are included and what are the ones that are excluded? And then as you look at that individual then thinks about it as they go forward. So then when you do performance appraisal, you're going to be assessing how well did I do? So it's not okay for me to unethically go out and raise funds. It's not okay for me to backstab another organization when I'm trying to raise money for my nonprofit.
Do you know, I can hear on the internet speak, well, yes, but we know that those are all common sense things that we shouldn't do. But if we don't track them, they do tend to get away from you because it develops anyway.
It happens. The people, I'll give an example. Respect. Respect tends to be a core value that many organizations identify. Well, how am I being disrespectful to others? Well, by not showing up to work on time. That's disrespectful to my organization and to my coworkers. Thinking of it in those terms, it's how do I then have a conversation about an individual, because not showing up to work, but when we think about it in terms of respect, I want to be a person of respect who respects others. That's just an example of how it plays out in the workplace.
You know, how do you get around, another issue is nonprofits generally are so tightly skeleton staffed, if that's a phrase I can use, that they are limited in the amount of time they can spend, or that's the rationalization, right? I'm limited in the amount of time that I can spend going over core values, which should be common sense to my staff anyway. Does it really help the morale? I mean, they need to be out raising the bottom line. We've got a budget of, $250,000, and we've got to go see XYZ donor. I don't have time to worry about this. They should already know how to be respectful of each other.
Right.
But why is it important to take that time?
Well, because you will take the time if you don't. I like to say that what happens if you're not intentional about creating the type of culture that you want for your organization, what happens by accident is a toxic culture.
Oh, yes.
Think of your garden. I can think of my garden. If I'm not intentional about going out and pulling the weeds, what happens by accident is the weeds flourish. It's the same thing in an organization. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to make this the stinking, most nasty, toxic place for anybody to work. But how many of us have worked?
Some people might. You never.
But how many of us have worked in those places?
Yes, exactly.
If Gallup had a study that came out in the late 2013, 87% of people are not engaged in their work.
87%?
87%.
How do they define engagement?
Well, engagement is defined by whether or not they, there's 25% of the 80s, of 100% are actually disengaged. They hate their work.
Wow.
They hate where they are.
That's
the other ones they're
sad.
just floating through the day. They're not passionate about it. They just show up. So by probability, we either are one of those people, we work with one of those people, or those people are working for us.
Wow.
So if I'm a leader of an organization, what part of it do I own? To create an environment where my people can thrive.
And by
And-
own,
By own it, meaning I am responsible.
and
Now-
to live it.
And to live it.
To
I have to
demonstrate it.
model it. I have to not let those things go, say they should know better. Well, it's amazing how many adults behave like children. He said, she said, I did not. It happens in organizations all day long, every day.
And I bet you there is at least 9 out of 10 people watching this show are going, oh yeah,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
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 Preach, because that's exactly what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I-
that's the part of it, if you're not intentional. So the intentional steps are, when you say you don't have time, what I like to do is incorporate it in intentionally to what we are already doing. So if we are already giving a message about our organization, how do we incorporate our core values into it?
How do you tell your story through your core values?
Yes. How do I put it on my website? How do I incorporate it into my newsletter? How do I incorporate it into my staff meetings? How do I incorporate it into the things that I am already doing every day?
How? I'm listening.
Okay. Well, I just met with a
Yeah.
client that happens
Right.
to be a not-for-profit organization, and we were talking about those things. So we have on our email signature, let's incorporate our core values so it comes up.
Okay.
Somebody shared with me a great one, which is we have to change our passwords every so often. Let my
They have to be the
password
core
be
values.
the core value, so that as I'm typing that in,
It's reinforced.
It's reinforced. Now, don't tell the bad guys out there, but something that would remind us of the core values. If I'm having a staff meeting, and we usually will have people share icebreakers or whatever, be core values centered. Who have you seen this month, or this week, or whatever the time frame, has been a really great example of our core values. Allow people to affirm each other.
And by, like you'd said earlier, by demonstration of showing up to that meeting on time. If respect is one of your core values, of honoring somebody else's time. If you set a meeting and say it's going to be 15 minutes long, then it's 15 minutes long. To abide by that, to live that example of going through it. I'm a Huetteman follower. I totally buy into this hook, line, and sinker. I don't even have to read the book to drink the Kool-Aid, but I am going to read the book because I think it's essential for it. And I love the fact that you work with nonprofits on doing it, because nonprofits, that sector seems to be the one sector outside of the corporations and whatnot who have taken the time, the initiative, and the money to do the work that's essential for it. And the nonprofit sector is very busy with multiple hats and doing other things, and I would love to see that more often. So, I'd encourage you, if you're in the Tampa Bay area, to look up Lisa Huetteman and to, come to one of her Leaders Valued leaders-centered, how do you call it? The value-centered
Centered
leadership programs offered here at the Nonprofit Leadership Center of Tampa Bay. Or if you're not, go and look and check out her book. What's your website address?
It's theblackdiamond.com
Okay.
with hyphens. So
Okay.
it's the-black-diamond.com, and also thevalueofcorevalues.com.
Thevalueofcorevalues.com. I just think that's beautiful, and it's an essential thing if we could have more people do it. Love that you're on the show. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, it's time for Truth or Care, which will be an interesting thing coming from you since you're already so heart-centered to hear what your purpose is or how your heart defines philanthropy. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with the conclusion of today's Philanthropy Show.
And now a word from our studio sponsor.
Hi, I'm Jen Dodd, the Education Manager here at the Nonprofit Leadership Center, and I wanted to offer you a quick tip for getting started on social media. I was meeting with a nonprofit professional here in Tampa Bay recently, and she told me that she had no idea how to use her Twitter account. We talked a bit, and I found out that she travels all throughout Tampa Bay visiting other nonprofit organizations, so I suggested that she tweet before or after a meeting. For example, great meeting with @NLC, learning how they empower, educate, and connect, #Tampa Bay, #nonprofits. I told her to be sure to use that organization's Twitter handle, the @ and to use relevant hashtags like #Tampa Bay and #nonprofit to increase her Twitter reach. That's easy enough, right? We offer these kinds of social media and online communications classes developed especially for nonprofits throughout the year, and we also offer our own tips and quick solutions on our own social media channels. So follow us on Facebook or Twitter and check out our upcoming classes on our training schedule, and we'll be happy to see you here soon at the NLC, where we educate, empower, and connect nonprofits.
The Philanthropy Show is on demand every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at both thephilanthropyshow.com and YouTube/WatchMVVP TV.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show, talking today with Lisa Huetteman, who has just expanded my world while we've been here, and I'm sure that you've all enjoyed it as well, talking about the value of core value leadership, because it is an essential piece of every organization. And this is the time in our show when we talk about Truth or Care, which is, in summary, your heart's definition of philanthropy. And like I said before the break, you are definitely a heart-centered person.
Yeah.
It's good to see that. And to know that when you stepped outside of your corporate work and you evaluated what are my core values, and that this is how it kind of, you're telling us about your background, how it led into what you're doing now. I love that. But let me just ask you that. So then how do you define philanthropy? What does it mean to you, and why are you working with nonprofits in this?
I really think giving of ourselves. So the typical thing we say, time, talent, and treasure. I heard another definition which I think is lovely, which is work, wisdom, and wealth.
Oh.
And so I love to share my wisdom, because I have a lot more wisdom than wealth, and that's priceless. So I do give of myself a lot in my philanthropy. It started actually, though, while I was working, when I didn't have so much time, I can write a check. And my earliest remembrance of this is sitting in one of those United Way meetings where they played one of those tear-jerking videos. And I remember thinking, I am so glad that there are organizations out there to help individuals who need help. I can write a check. And that was the beginning. And as I became more involved, they asked me to participate in leadership roles, and I've been involved with the United Way in some form or fashion ever since, and that's been 15, 20 years. But through United Way, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of different nonprofits, and there are so many wonderful nonprofits who are doing so much wonderful work. I would like to help them all.
Right.
Which allows me, through the Nonprofit Leadership Center, where I spend some time, is to be able to work with a lot of them. And through my work, help them develop the talents and skills that they have that allows them to better serve their clients. And it's very rewarding. It's truly priceless.
Makes you feel good. Yeah, well, thank you for what you do. I think that there are many skills that, I can impart some video technique skills, and that's helpful, but I think what you're doing is really about the empowerment of the person, and then byproduct of that, empowering the team, and that's so important and so vital. not even from a corporation, small business, nonprofit standpoint, but just from a humanity standpoint. You know, I love what you're doing. And when I saw you on the Nonprofit Leadership Center's website, I thought, I got to get her on the show, because that's just, it's great. It's great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
And the time is done. So here we are at the end of another The Philanthropy Show. Join us next Monday at 4 o'clock for a new posting. We'll see you then.
Do you have an idea for the Philanthropy Show? Contact us via our website or email us at tps@myvideovoice.com.